you guys are easy. The slides work, and you're like, yay! I love the energy here. So awesome. Kior from Massachusetts, which is hard to say. It's actually another native name. So, yeah, I mean, like white people in Massachusetts keep it short, like Charleston or something, or Salem. But this is my backyard. Just so you know, I left summer to come here. And then it would really be unfair to mention the cat and not share a picture. This is Martin. So in addition to being the executive director of the Python Software Foundation and a person that lives in Massachusetts and has a cat, I am also a big sci-fi nerd. Do I have other sci-fi nerds in the house? Excellent. So when I think about like what we could do with technology, like deep in my like 6-year-old brain is, well, obviously we're going to go to space. We're going to treat everybody really nice. We're going to do away with money because who needs that? And we're just going to feed everybody and do science all day. Awesome. So I think that's like a really good goal for the future. I don't know if it's going to involve nacelle tubes or whatever, but I kind of think it might involve Python. Which is part of why I do what I do. So I am at the Python Software Foundation. How many people already know what the Python Software Foundation is? Okay, so we got about half, and that's okay, because I can tell you. So in addition to being a nonprofit steward of the Python programming language, which means we house like all of the infrastructure by which you can get Python on the internet, both CPython, the programming language itself, and then PyPI, which is the package index, which is like a bazillion packages that you can add onto your Python to make it do other cool stuff. So we do all that infrastructure, but we also take care of all the legal stuff that goes with having like intellectual property, which is what we call software now because it's not a house and you can't touch it and you can't move it. So it's an idea of property, but that means we have to protect the trademark. We take care of any licensing things that come up. If anyone wants to talk more about licensing in another universe, I spent my whole day talking about it, which I will not do here, but luckily we have a pretty easygoing license at Python, so not that much comes up. But we are also tasked with stewardship of the global Python community, which is a huge responsibility. So that means it's part of our mission to make sure that Python is welcoming and diverse and is growing and serves a global community. And that's really, really key. Another key piece is that Python is open source. So like a lot of times I'll meet people from other tech stacks and they're like, oh, you must have like a couple Teslas and a mansion. And I'm like, oh, no. We're a nonprofit that runs open source software and gives it away to you for free, which means like you just always have it. And that means that it will always be available for free. It will always be accessible. We're never going to change the license on you and be like, oh, now you have to pay for Python. That's never going to happen because it's part of our mission. It also means that if someone came to me and said like, hey, Deb, could we put something in Python that makes it suck for our competitors but awesome for us? I would say no. And they're like, what if I gave you a lot of money to do that? I would be sad for a minute that we couldn't take the money, but we wouldn't take it and it wouldn't happen. So in those cases, I do try to talk people into giving us the money anyway for something else, but which usually doesn't work. If people think they can buy Python and make it annoying for their competitors, like it's usually not going to be a good collaboration. So in addition to being open source, like Python is really good for a lot of things. So I've been here as the executive director for 2 years. And one of the things that happens when you're the executive director of the Python Software Foundation is that people tell you what they use Python for, which is really cool. Like they're like, oh, I finally get to tell someone who's going to be really interested what I use Python for. And I'm like, yes, you are. So now I have this list. So if people ask me, what do people use Python for? I probably sound like this. Because I'm like, oh yeah, you can use it to talk to your thermostat. You can use it to make music. You can use it to make art. You can use it to like spy on worms and create wallpapers that somehow reflect worms. You can use it to go to space. You can put it in telescopes. Like you can use it to collect data to do labor organizing, and you can even cure cancer with Python. So it's pretty cool. I'm really glad that we're able to provide this cost-free tool for anybody to use to do all those cool things. And if you want, you can come and tell me what you use Python for after. So that's a lot of uses. It's a lot of users too. It's about 8 million users. We don't really know because we give it out for free. Like you don't get a receipt. We don't give a receipt or whatever. And we don't know if you pass it along. So I think that's kind of a big responsibility, which is why I wanted to talk about future-proofing Python. Let's talk about the future. The future means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I was like, how long do we think we want to be like kind of supporting Python and having people use Python? And I was like, we can start with 100 years, right? Like, in case you didn't know, we're already 33 years in, so that's just like 3 more of what we've already done. So that's not too hard, right? We could probably do that. The other thing that I looked into for this talk is what is future-proofing anyway? And it turns out it's one of those terms that kind of means whatever you want it to mean, like punk or open source or AI. And you can just like make it mean whatever you want. So when people talk about future-proofing buildings, they're like, oh, it's going to be earthquake-proof and flood-proof and like, I don't know if you do airplane-proof here. We do that in the US now. But sorry, that's not really a joke. But people do, like, they talk about making their brand future-proof, and that usually just means, like, standing for nothing and being totally neutral so that you never get into trouble with anyone ever, regardless of how terrible their ideas are. People also talk about future-proofing software, and this includes some things that we're already familiar with, like making it modular so that it's like, oh, the only way to get it is to install like 300,000 lines of code, and it's like, oh, that's terrible. Or, you know, making it so that like the pieces work together easily and they're documented, all those kinds of things. People even talk about future-proofing their kids. Like, it usually means teaching them how to like, you know, do laundry and cook and like, and accept disappointment occasionally, which is, you know, probably a good idea. But like most of it's about resilience, right? And so the thing that I could not find is anyone talking about future-proofing communities. So, because that was the one that's the most interesting to me. And I'm like, we're doing pretty good in the programming language, but like, what about future-proofing the community? Like, I look at some of the communities that have been around for like a really long time, like the Catholic Church, and I'm like, how'd that happen? But like, it's money. Sorry. But you know, and some of the other things that have stuck around for a really long time, it's like, well, what makes those communities stick around forever? And it turns out communities are made of people, not in an eating way, but like in a nice way. And so I wanted to think about like, how do we future-proof the Python community? I think it's people, and we're going to talk about systems, and we're going to talk about knowledge. I think the most important part of the people question is, can you accept newcomers? And this one, like on the face of it, it's like the code is over there for free. Like obviously newcomers can get here. But I think it requires a little more thought than that. Like, yes, of course, we threw the code over here. You could get it off the internet. But like, can we accept newcomers into our community? And it turns out like, yes and no. Like, you know, you have to be a little bit oriented in a certain way. It helps if you have a little bit of a network, like the group of people in this room, to kind of help you on your journey. But like, it's not necessarily like you hear about Python and then like, you know, montage 3 weeks later, you're contributing to core. That would be amazing. I don't know how we get there, but I would love it. In the short term, I think about how we send newcomers places. And so we own python.org, which is this website, which is a little dated. It's not really where I would send newcomers. It's like, I mean, technically, if you had some support and some knowledge, and maybe you were taking a class, this would work out okay for you. So we recently started a user success work group because we have found that many people are like, I heard about Python and I'm ready to be part of it. And then, oh, okay. Well, let's figure out like what is getting people like kind of stuck on, like in a sales situation, we'd call that the funnel. So we have some bumps or nubs or obstructions in our funnel. And we're going to try and figure out what those are. In the medium term, so like, okay, awesome, you've got Python, you figured out where all the libraries are that you want to do. Maybe you even got to a place where you're like, I'm a frog researcher and I figured out some awesome ways to sort my frog data. I'm going to share that package on PyPI, and you did it. Awesome, great. But like in the medium term, like this is, remember we're looking at like 100 years, right? Is like, how are we going to have more core developers in the next like 20 years? Like, so like how many people in here expect to retire in the next 30 years? The next 40 years? Okay, that's most of the room. I'm not gonna like call out people that are underage. But we aren't doing such a great job of bringing in the next batch of core developers. So this is on Mastodon from Marietta, who is herself a core developer. And she said the last time a woman got promoted as a Python core developer was 21 men ago. And she says, sometimes I feel alone in thinking about this. She got a little response that she's actually not alone in thinking about this. So that's the nice news. The tough news is that I'm actually not entirely sure how to fix that. And I don't think I can personally fix it alone. I was a very bossy child, but I found that doesn't work so great as an adult. So I can't just make people do things. As much as I might like to like think about that in a fantasy way sometimes. So how do we do that? And I think that the reason that we kind of keep getting the same kinds of people in the core development team is because it's how we think about newcomers. And we're not alone in this. So like before coming to open source software, I worked in political organizing in Massachusetts where I live. And this is sort of endemic to movements and groups and communities, is that you think newcomers are going to look just like you, but slightly different. Like they're going to be like mini you or something. And you're like, oh, great. Like I don't have to change anything about our approach. Our documentation is perfect. I wrote it myself 15 years ago. And like newcomers are going to be able to totally pick that up and be doing great in like no time at all, this 2-week montage. But once you kind of throw diversity into the mix, it's like, wait a minute, like people want different things. They have different learning styles. They have different priorities. They have different reasons for wanting to be part of the Python community and part of Python core, part of like, the packaging community and all those kinds of things. And it turns out that the invitations matter a lot. As I said, I used to work in local politics, and the organization I worked at, we had no marketing people, you'll be able to tell from the name. Citizens for Participation in Political Action, which we called CPPAX and pronounced CPPAX, which like means nothing. But we totally got the URL as soon as the internet became a thing for that community. What we did struggle with, Massachusetts is pretty white. And so we were like, we're doing this social justice, like environmental justice, like workers' rights org, but it feels really white here. And it's like, So we talked about this a lot. Like, how do we bring in people that care about what we care about, but aren't like us and don't feel invited maybe? And we had some missteps, like, there was like a education work group that was trying to invite primary school teachers to meetings at 8 p.m. I don't know about you, but like in our country, school teachers get up at like 5 or 6 in the morning and they're not coming downtown for an 8 p.m. meeting. We had some other we had another conversation. We were working on some environmental issues where we were like, mainly we were trying to increase recycling and pass an Endangered Species Act that would protect the owl. Maybe Richard will talk more about owls later. Owls are great, but we talked to this community. It was a group of Black activists that lived in Dudley Square, which is a poor neighborhood and a primarily Black neighborhood, which also happens to have the bus station in it. Like 60 bus berths and the buses would idle, diesel buses, all the time. So we reached out to this group and we're like, hey, do you want to join us on environmental stuff and come work on our issues? And they were like, we're really focused on stopping the buses from idling in front of our houses and our schools and our yards and our parks. And we're like, oh, the buses. And we're like, where are the buses even anyway? Oh, right. Oh, in front of your house. Okay. Yeah. No, I can see why you're not interested in dropping that topic to work on our topic, because your kids have respiratory issues and asthma, and, like half the kids in the neighborhood are carrying around inhalers. And so, like, us being like, hey, we all care about the same stuff. Why don't you work on our little projects here? And not to say that recycling and owls are, like, those are good projects too. But they were like, our project that's important to us is, like, extremely close and extremely personal. And so you're not going to get us to come and switch. And they're like, if you want to come work with us on the bus exhaust, like, you're welcome to. And I think a couple of people did show up for a few meetings, but we never, like, merged the groups, and we never just, like, kind of brought them in. So we never figured out how to, like, fully work with that group and make our power stronger together, which is unfortunate. But I think, like, for a future-proofed community, like, we have to figure out how to get good at that, right? So just to say, like, newcomers will not be exactly like the people who are already here. They're going to be new and different. So related to this, like, not just like newcomer, like warm bodies, okay, sure, but like, can you bring in junior people? Because like I said, so like we're all going to retire in the next like 30-ish years. Awesome. So that means we need to be bringing junior people in. And that means, like, sometimes, like, thinking about some of the things that are weird, where we're like, oh, we just always do this. And it's like, is it a funny joke that only people from like the 70s get? Because that might be tough. Or for like the core developers group, like, one thing I think that's really interesting about the group of people who contribute to Python itself is that they started when Python was like little tiny baby. And so for them to be like, oh yeah, you can just come in the way I did. It's like, no, now Python is this big. And so we're going to have to build specific pathways and on-ramps to get people to be able to participate in the complexity that we have built. It's good, but it's like, you can't just be like, oh yeah, like Neo from the Matrix, like, just put Python in and then you're core developer. So that means thinking about the structures that we build to bring in newcomers a little bit more. And I bring this up here because, like, I don't think I have all the ideas on how to do that. So I'm, like, talking to as many people as I can about, like, hey, if you have great ideas or you've seen amazing ways to bring newcomers into, like, complex 33-year-old projects, like, I want to hear it. And then finally, a little bit related to this is, can you accept new ideas? So we already talked about how, like, newcomers are not, like, they're not going to be exactly like us. But if you bring people into a community and you say, like, okay, cool, you can sit on the bench and watch while we do all the important stuff, people will not stay. You'll turn around, that bench will be empty. And so that means that when we bring in new people, we have to bring them in fully and be like, tell us your ideas. Like, okay, all right, maybe we need to go back a little so we can understand some more things about, like, what we already have. And then let's see how your ideas work on that. And, like, really bringing people to the table. Most folks, like, it's interesting because you think, like, oh, smart people that have a lot of ideas, like, who else would we bring to this group? And it's going to be other smart people with a lot of ideas. So you can't, like, expect them to participate in this, like, kind of observer role forever while the grown-ups do all the fun stuff. So part of a future-proof community is saying, like, hey, newcomers, what are your ideas? Let's talk about it. Let's bring you to the table. Let's bring you to where the decisions get made so that you can be part of that decision-making process. All right. So that's people. Community is made of people. Systems, a little different. Although there's still a lot of people in there. So one thing I think that's great is like, and I talked about this earlier, how like anyone can use Python for anything. So when I think about this like future in 100 years where we're going to live on Mars, maybe with or without Elon Musk, whatever, but like we're going to need like a language that's like, we sent that stuff to Mars a zillion years ago, so it's written in Fortran, and now we've got like whatever the next thing after Rust is, and they need to talk to each other, or the little life bubble we all live in is going to collapse. Like that really, to me, sounds like a job for Python. And in fact, we've already done something like that. Are people familiar with the Chandra telescope? Couple hands. Okay, so the Chandra telescope, I had one date, I want to make sure there. Okay, so the Chandra telescope was launched in 1999 into like a high elliptical orbit, which means like it's really far up there. And so you can see here that, so it's like, because it's so high in our atmosphere, it gets a lot of radiation from the sun. So NASA developed a special space foil. They probably have a better name for it, but like to keep the radiation from melting the expensive instruments inside of the telescope. So one of the things that's interesting about sending stuff up to space is you can't truly test it on the ground. Like, so you send something up to space and you're like, well, hope that works. For like a couple $1 billion. It must be very exciting to work for NASA. But so they sent it up, and it turns out the space foil wasn't quite as effective as they were hoping. Whoops. So they ended up like, they were like, it's almost effective enough if we could get the telescope to change its orientation often enough to the sun. So this fella, Tom Aldcroft, said, oh, okay, well, and they had set up the telescope to, like, we would talk to it from the ground, right? Because we would get information from it and then send information back up to it. And so it was intended for us to be able to continue to talk to it for its whole 5-year run. But it was only a couple weeks before we were like, whew, it's getting hot in here. So Tom Aldcroft said, like, oh, okay, I think that we can get a collection of tools together to get the telescope to slowly rotate. So the tools he used, Sherpa, PyTables, NumPy, Matplotlib, and SciPy. And so he wrote a bunch, he put all those tools together, which already exist, awesome, sent them up to the Chandra telescope with its like slightly substandard space foil, and got it to turn around slowly like a rotisserie chicken, so that it could stay upstairs, up there in the atmosphere doing its thing. So remember I said the Chandra launched in 1999, and it was intended to go for 5 years. It's still up there. So the rotation of the space foil worked. Yay, Python and Tom Aldcroft. So I think that that's a really cool thing. Like, and you've heard of probably like half of those tools. They already existed. He didn't build those tools from scratch. He was like, oh, I need a little like data analysis. I need some tables. I need something that gives directions. And all right, let's get it up there before that thing melts. So, so Python is very cool in that way. And I think that's part of it, is that the systems that if we're going to go for 100 years or whatever, they need to be easy and easygoing. And I would say Python is generally pretty easygoing. I do read Discuss, but generally we're pretty easygoing. And, easy to download, easy to get along with. The other thing I think that is super fun is that Python gets along with every language. So this is just a short list, and you can tell me which ones I missed, but Pyo3 makes Python and Rust work together, Python and C work together in Python, HaPy lets you call Haskell in Python, F2Py or fmodpy lets you call Fortran from Python. That was not a theoretical example. Py4j lets you call Java from Python. Perlfunc obviously lets you call Perl from Python. GoPy lets you call Go code from Python. Python Monkey is JavaScript in Python. CL4Py lets you call Lisp from Python. Pip install Python net lets you use C# in Python. ScalaPy lets you use Python libraries in Scala. And a little scheme in Py is exactly what it sounds like. So, and like, yes, you can tell me which ones I missed later. And I haven't used any of those, so I don't know if they're good. I just know they exist. But I think that's really like a cool approach to being like, oh, like when I think of something that I want to see like around forever, I want the vibes of like, oh, hey, like I might be able to help you with that. Like we've got some stuff, like, you know. So like having a system that is easy and easygoing and is ready to go, I think really awesome. Also, like pretty modular, like you can pick and choose all the different tools that you want. But more so than that, like I think I want to see us building that modularity into like our workflows too. When I think about stuff that's going to be around forever, it's not like, oh, person A takes the first part of this workflow and then gives it to person B, and then they give it to person C, who's almost always on vacation, and sends it back whenever they feel like to person B, who may or may not the result, and then they tell person A they can finally finish this task. Having that like kind of like broken up brittle workflow, not so awesome. So like, and this is something where like it happens when, you know, you have a community that's been around for a long time, like someone's doing like 19 things that don't really make sense together in conjunction with like 5 other people, and the workflow is really spread out and weird. And so like, I'd like to see us like kind of pull those things together and then also make them not dependent on a single person. So many years ago, I was at the Boston Python meetup, and we had someone who had been doing like 28 different things. And then they went to go like dream job in California, which is far from Boston. And, you know, the organizer there was like, I don't know what we're going to do. Like, Sarah, not her real name. If Sarah leaves, we're basically like, we're just going to close up shop. I'm like, no. And it's like, where are we going to find a new Sarah? And I'm like, we're not going to find a new Sarah. We're not going to find someone that's going to do the 28 different things that Sarah accumulated over her 5 years here. We're going to find like 10 or maybe 15, Sarah was pretty good, 10 or 15 people to each do 1 or 2 of those things. So that, you know, so instead of thinking of it like, oh no, something awesome happened for Sarah and now she's leaving our work group, it's like, oh, awesome. Okay, this is an opportunity for us to invite like 10 or 12 people to step up to the plate. We are already doing pretty good here. On like, you know, breaking stuff up from one person to many. And so like my push here is like, keep doing that. Think of that in your smaller parts of the community and your projects, is like, if you've got something where you're like, oh, that one person who like can't go on vacation or the project's closed, like figure out how to give them some redundancy so that they're allowed to go places, break those tasks up. What you never want is a project where you are stuck in the situation of being like, hi, yeah, oh, I guess we do it like this way now, right? Sorry, I'm a little old. I know you're at your sister's wedding. Could you VPN in? Okay, all right, not during the ceremony, but like maybe during the reception. Like, so don't make your project so brittle that you're ever making that call. Like, everything should have a second person. We'll talk about that in this section. So knowledge, like sharing the knowledge, future-oriented leadership. So this is, when I think about future-oriented leadership, we're like kind of thinking about how to set things up for when we are no longer here. Maybe we're retired. Maybe we got that dream job in California. Maybe we went to grad school for something wacky and moved to the other side of the world. But you're setting it up for a time you might not be here, which might be a little bit sad. Like you're like, I'm going to haunt you forever. I will never go away. I'll be part of this project, like, you know, from beyond the mortal coil. But you don't want that. You want to build in redundancy. Like I said, anything that you do, like you want to be like, okay, at least 2 people should be able to do it. So you're like, I found a mini me. Like, I'm not haunting the project. I have a ghost protege. It's cool. And so you like anything that you're doing, it's like, oh, okay, so this task like could be done by at least 2 people. This task could be given to somebody else, like when I'm on vacation or at my sister's wedding. This task would continue to happen if someone got sick, like so that your project is like robust and resilient. All these nice things about future proofing that we love. Um, the other piece that I think is really good about like setting your project up for like when you're out of the office or out of the mortar coil or whatever is to always be explaining what you're doing. And this is like, I don't, it's, so like you're delegating these projects, like you didn't get a new Sarah, you got 10 new Sarahs and you're like, okay, this is how we order the pizza. But you want to give them the perspective, like, where is this coming from? Like, like we expect about 50 people. Like, so you tell them the amount. And then if the amount changes, like, you don't have to go back and be like, so the number of pizzas is coupled to the number of people in this way. Like, they already know. And then be like, we've been getting 60 people lately. Awesome. I'm going to throw 2 more pizzas in there. But this works for anything. Like, if you give people the why of what is most important about the work, then they can continue to optimize for it in the right way. So sometimes the thing you want is cheap. You're like, all right, we go to this pizza joint because it's the cheapest. And I'm working in nonprofit. So a lot of times that is our goal. It's like, okay, like, yes, like a collared shirt with 4 colors on it is nice, but like a regular t-shirt with 2 is cheap. Like maybe we're going for that because of the number we're buying. Or maybe it's something where it's like, oh, this needs to be fast. Like, we want to make sure that the website gets updated immediately so people can see like what is happening. And so the most important part on this task is speed. Or maybe it's something else where the most important part of this task is accuracy. So like we're doing people's names, like on like the badges, we want to make sure we get all the accents and diacritics right. So this one, not about speed, not about fast, about accuracy. And this is the case with any kind of work. Like if you are giving work to somebody else, you want to let them know like what you are optimizing for and what the scope is of like what's good and acceptable and what's like, woo, those badges should not cost $200 or, whatever it is. And this is the same for like any task that you give people, like data entry, like websites, anything. So the context allows people to kind of, optimize as they go without you having to come back and micromanage, right? Or be called like when you're doing something out of the office. The other thing that I think is key about future-oriented leadership is giving away your Legos. And this idea comes from startup culture where like you're expecting to grow. And so sometimes what happens is that, like as a leader, and I'm looking at all of you as either current or potential future leaders, is that you get good at something and then you're like, oh, I could just stop and be really good at something. And it's like, does the community need you to stop and just be really good at something that a younger person or a newer person could be brought into? Even if it's really fun, I would encourage you to be like, hey, I enjoyed doing this for like 2 or 3 years. It was super, super fun. Maybe I'll give it to someone else and they can have that joy and then I can find whatever else needs doing here. So I would urge you to think about that as like part of like building your community, building your legacy, and like part of your own, like it also has a nice piece where it's like personal growth as well. You get to learn to go and do new things if you pass along the things you already learned to the next person. And like this is how growth happens. Growth doesn't happen when like one person's like, I pick all the talks. I am the MC. I also do the code of conduct and like I stuff every swag bag. And then some other people can like take the trash out and clean the toilets and watch me and appreciate how amazing I am. Like you can see that you might have trouble recruiting people back for that other job like pretty quickly. But basically, anytime you're like, wow, this is really fun and amazing to do, if you've done it a couple times, think about passing it along. And then, of course, documentation. Um, and there, you could do whole talks on documentation, but my key point here is that it should not be in 100 places that are hard to find. It should be, do people know about how like mushrooms live underground and they all talk to each other as like a like huge organism? Okay, cool. Cool. It's nice to know everyone's been down that same Wikipedia hole with me. So I don't have to go too detailed here. But yeah, basically, if you're doing documentation, as much as possible, not passwords, sure, but like everything should be available to everyone in one place. Like it shouldn't be like, oh, Chris puts his stuff here, and like, Deb thinks it's fun to have it on like a SVN repository because she's old school and won't move it. Like that's terrible. Don't do that. Like if you must, you should at least link to them like from each other. But even better is to move all your things to one place. And I know that like tech is fun. There's always new tools. It's very tempting to be like, I just read about this thing last week. I could move like our whole documentation over there, and then you start with just the part you pay attention to and then never move the rest. It's very easy. It's like it's a trap waiting for all of us. So please try to resist. All right. In conclusion, so in this whole thinking about the future, I was kind of like, how long will Python be around? Like, how long could it be around? I am no time traveler, so I don't actually know the answer to this. But I looked at another Wikipedia hole on the far, far future. There are people that have thought about the far, far future and like what could happen and what it could look like. One of the things, there is a group of people that think about earthworms, giant earthworms, and where they will be in 100,000 years. Apparently, they will finally be everywhere on the earth in 100,000 years. So in 100,000 years, we'll have amazing soil everywhere. So we might still need Python, to like grow food and distribute it and things like that. People could be brought back to life in 300,000 years. This one is according to the writers of Time Trap, so maybe less reliable than some of the others. But, if we're reincarnating people, like, maybe they may want to keep their data from their old life to their new life, so they could still be using Python. The San Andreas Fault. In 50 million years, it's going to collapse into the ocean. Chris, you might want to move by then. I don't think we'll have Superman around for this time, which is like, there's a whole Superman movie where the plot is they're going to sink the San Andreas, like this chunk of land, and create new waterfront property and get rich. But if like stuff's dropping into the ocean, like, and we're going to build new stuff, data backups, we might need Python. Pangea, the sequel, which someone's already named, Pangea Proxima. It sounds kind of like a transformer, but whatever. 100 million years, the whole planet will be back into one single continent. Probably. I don't know how accurate this stuff is. Like I said, not a time traveler, but if we have one single continent, like I think the internet might actually work everywhere by then. So I think we'll still be using Python, right? Like, okay. And then this one is like, this is when I think we can finally be finished. The heat death of the universe, 110 or 120 trillion years from now, there won't be computers because all of the energy in the entire universe will be dissipated. So that's like, so we won't need Python here. So 100 trillion years, we should still have Python. 110, 120, maybe not. Anyway, so what I wanted to say is it doesn't matter so much if we know what the future is. This is Harry Seldon from Foundation, a fictional character who supposedly knows the far, 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 far future. The show is fun. But like, I think it doesn't matter if we know what the future is gonna be. Like, it is not really I think that's not important. I think most of the things about making Python future-proof also kind of make things nice for where we are already. Like having documentation that's good and in one place doesn't only benefit people in 100 trillion years. It's also nice for us. Having people who are in leadership that are always willing to pass the torch and bring new people in is also nice for us now. It might help us get to 100 trillion years of Python, but it's also nice for us now. So I guess it's less important that we know what the future is going to be, but that we believe there will be a future and that we picture smart people that need robust, flexible tools and an accessible, welcoming community as the architects of the future. So thank you so much for taking this journey with me. I would be happy to take a couple of questions depending on how we're doing on time. I don't want to cut into tea.
Yep, we've got a few minutes for questions. What we'll do is you'll raise your hand. I'll come get you, or we'll pass the microphone to you.
We've got a special box thing that the AV people are like holding up, and that can be thrown around.
Oh my God, we're playing a sport game?
Yeah, it's Sports Cube.
Oh my God.
Oh.
What I'm going to ask you to do is leave your mask on when you're asking the question so that we're not passing around like everyone's shoutiness. So there was one over here. I can either run or we're pitching it. Oh!
So close.
I'm not sure this is safer, Chelsea.
Hello? It works. I was curious, we were talking about people welcoming newcomers.
Yeah.
What are some of the, I guess, metrics or sort of observable behaviors you were looking for to know that somebody had felt accepted into the community, or that that the group perceived that they were now a part of the community?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And for one, I think a metric that would be useful is that leadership sort of reflects the demographic kind of splits that are present in the whole community. So that would be one. I do think also having people who have been around in Python for a really long time say, I've tried several times to get in and I've gotten stalled or stuck. I would like to never hear those again. Not because I don't want people to tell me if it's happening, but I would like people to say like, oh yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. So so I have some anecdotal, but I also have like, oh, our leadership doesn't completely represent our total community makeup.
I was also curious, like, what have you learned as sort of good practices for recognizing your volunteers?
Ooh, oh, that's a great question. So yeah, so recognizing volunteers is, so I think like giving people like a title, it costs you nothing, but it's great. So instead of being like, this is Russell, he does like all the crap I don't feel like doing, you could say, this is Russell, he's the deputy chair of the entire conference. Like, so that's one. You know, so that's one thing. The other thing you can do is that when you do introduce people, you know, you could say like, oh, this is Chelsea. They're amazing and have been super welcoming. And I felt great. Like, I'm so glad I met them. And like, ta-da, you know. So like, if you introduce people verbosely with like a little bit about how awesome they are, that is also really nice. That lets people know that you kind of see them and that you appreciate them. And then finally, I would say that like if you do any kind of like blog post or like release notes or anything like that, that you consider like all of your volunteers. And this is a really tough one sometimes for technical communities. Like it's very easy to just go to the repo and print out all the names of people that produce code, but then like taking just a few more minutes to add like people who helped you with translations, people who helped you with the event, people who helped set up the Hackfest, people who helped with fundraising for the event, like any of those other kinds of tasks that didn't quite get captured in the repo, making sure when you're thanking all your contributors that you put that in there too.
Great, thanks.
Any more questions? Hands up. Oh, one here.
Everyone will have to look alert. Like everyone wants
Hey!
All right. Who said nerds can't do sports?
Just talking to it.
You're just talking to it. Oh, hello. With future proofing, it's well, we like Python's a software project, right? So like the software industry is like so deeply embedded in Silicon Valley, and that like being a big source of money and stuff like that. And Silicon Valley is always trying to replace everything with like a new thing, which feels like in tension with the idea of future proofing one thing that we think should be around for 100 trillion years or something. Like, does that ever?
That's a great question, actually. So talking about like, we're talking about capitalism, right? So yes, yeah, I think about that a lot, and it's part of why I'm so glad that Python is incorporated as a nonprofit, like it's a charitable entity, and it cannot be for profit. I also think that like one of the things that is really great about Python is that you don't have to have money to be part of it. Like it certainly helps that we have some money, so that we for servers and things like that. But when I think of what the Python Software Foundation's mission is, it's not to compete with for-profit tech companies and to like, squeeze them out of their space or like beat them at the market or whatever. It's to like, I truly think our mission is to like find everyone that thinks they might want to use Python and make sure they can get to a chance to use it, and then use it to do what they want to do. So instead of creating a dependency relationship like, oh yeah, the first Python's free, but after that, it's like, no. Like, the Python is always free. Do whatever you want to do with it. So like in my mind, that's our goal as the Python Software Foundation, and to, more largely, I hope, the Python community. I think, there's a lot of interesting conversations happening right now around AI, which could be a whole other talk. But it's, I don't think that open source and Python living at a charitable nonprofit is trying to get people replaced by machines. What I think of is, I think being good at something that is open source actually makes it easy for you to be like, yeah, I don't like how I'm being treated here, and a zillion other workplaces use this technology, so I can just leave. As opposed to like, if you work at a company that uses something proprietary and they only use it at that company, and that company treats you terrible, and you have like 3 years of experience with something that you can't take anywhere, that is a little bit more of like a golden handcuff situation than learning something that's open source. Because then you can be like, I know my stuff and I'm worth a lot and I don't have to put up with this. So.
We've got time for one more question. Over here. Everybody watch out. Okay, new rule. You actually have to shout 4 when you're about to throw the thing, so that everyone knows that there's something coming their way.
Kia ora, and thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation. My question was more, I don't want to end in a negative space, but excluding people who are negative, or essentially keeping the community healthy by eliminating toxicity.
Yeah, no, and that, if you want, there's another Wikipedia hole called The Paradox of Tolerance on that one. But yes, honestly, like, every community is as grim as the worst behavior that it will tolerate. And for every person with like a full-time, all the time podium on the internet, who is like, what? I made a whole editor that people made their lives around or whatever. There are a bunch of other people who are like, yeah, I'm not coming back next time, or I didn't really feel comfortable, or, oh, I could never be more involved here, or, wow, I watched that and I was like, I'm not sure who I got involved with. And so I think like, it's important for us to have a mechanism for all those people who do not feel safe speaking out and being public and saying, I didn't feel good there. I don't feel like I want to be part of this. I don't think I'll be coming back, to put that somewhere and be like, hey, like, we might have to just say thank you for your service, but like, if you're keeping like the next 20 or 100 people out of the community, then it doesn't matter how long you've been here. I'm sorry. All right. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
I'm here the whole time, so if you want to talk about tax law or licensing or something deeper and more grim that we didn't get to, like, just come find me.